I've thought about this one for quite a long time. I'm better equipped to now in some ways. Talking about death and laughter, it seems as if when somebody is dying, there is the assumption that everyone should walk round with long faces and be terribly sensible and terribly serious and immensely respectful to one another and treat people who are associated with it with kid gloves. And of course it's a sensitive time for both the person who's dying and for the people who are close to them. But it doesn't mean that you can't laugh, that you can't have a joke. In fact, in some ways, you need to do it all the more. And I don't mean in the kind of macabre way that medical students can have when cutting up bodies. I'm talking more about the well, first off, the sort of absurdity of life and how there can be laughter in the most ridiculous of things, and that if the person that you are losing has a good sense of humour, which fortunately my mother did, then it can be a great pleasure, even if they're laughing at the fact that they're losing the plot or whatever. There are many people at the hospice who, staff included, who told me many stories about how my mother made them laugh. And they will remember that, because it's rare for a start, but also because it's nice to laugh. She and I and she and others would laugh hysterically sometimes at some of the just life in normal, as we would in normal circumstances. It was wonderful when she went to the hospice, because they got it. They seemed happy to enjoy the laughter, whereas at the hospital it was all a bit unacceptable. But now she's gone, and I see the same process in a slightly different way, or the same taboos in a slightly different way, I should say. It's both. People seem to treat you one of two ways. They either are terribly sombre and almost sort of pantomime serious, or they are kind of falsely jolly, as if they must keep the end up and they must make everything all right, so that you don't get upset. And it's hysterical, very well meaning, but completely ridiculous. The family friend and I, who were doing the rounds after she died, and I mean the rounds in terms of, and I will make a video on this at some point, though it will only be relevant for people who live in Britain. Obviously each country has its own systems, but I think it's kind of useful to know what you have to do when someone dies, because nobody tells you beforehand. Anyway, he and I were literally screaming with laughter at some of the ridiculous things that people were doing around us. And that didn't mean that it wasn't a sad time, because it was, it is. But it's also filled with laughter. And there's no reason to lose that. Can you imagine if you were dying and no one ever laughed around you, no one ever dared to say something funny or entertaining or share some small pleasure with you? How sad that would be. It would almost be like being dead before you had died. That doesn't make any sense. Something to think about. Anyway, yet another bizarre part of this taboo that should never have been taboo at all.